Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we've seen once again Russia seemingly attacking residential areas, raising human rights and war crimes concerns. What can you tell us about the latest developments?
Earlier this week, there was a Russian strike that actually hit a Dnipro apartment building. It was a 9-story building. The strike took down the 2nd through 9th floors. The death toll has continued to rise. Right now it's at about 45 people. There are about 80 people who were hurt. There were a number of people that were reported missing. They've either been located or identified. And this really was one of the biggest strikes to date in terms of a civilian casualty. And we heard actually an advisor from President Zelensky hypothesized that this was actually the result of the Ukrainian air defense systems hitting a Russian strike. We also saw subsequently this advisor offer his resignation because we saw the Kremlin then issue his talking points and cite him in particular as their lame excuse behind the strike. And so this really was not the first, but just another example of the brutal effects of Russia's targeting of civilian infrastructure.
So this has given new urgency to the West and to other allied countries in terms of coming to Ukraine's aid. So what are some of the things that leaders are contemplating right now, doing possibly differently than what we've done in the past?
Good question. So it's important to recognize what time of year it is. Right now, we're in January. It's cold. But everyone knows that the spring is coming, and there's an expectation of a renewed Russian offensive once it gets a little bit warmer. And so given those circumstances, the U.S. and a number of other Western and NATO allies recognize the need for tanks. And so we've seen the U.S. agree to send armored vehicles already, but we haven't seen them provide tanks, and there's slight differences in terms of capabilities, training, maintenance, so there's some distinctions there. But one big aspect is Germany. And so Germany has Leopard tanks, and not only are they not providing them, but there are about a dozen European countries that also have these German tanks, but the German government is not allowing them to provide Ukraine with their tanks. And so right now we really are sort of at a stalemate in terms of Western support and tanks. And so this week, U.S. defense officials have traveled to Germany, and some have gone to Ukraine, but specifically in Germany, we're seeing Secretary Austin and General Mark Milley, the Joint Chief of Staff, go to Germany for the 8th round of the Defense Contact Group, which is a group of about 50 defense leaders from all across the world that meet monthly to discuss the latest in aid for Ukraine and the situation on the battlefield. And so we've heard tanks are the big talk of the town as it comes to the meeting, which is in the next couple days. And there is expected to be another U.S. military aid package announced afterwards, in addition to similar aid packages announced from a number of different countries. And again, the thing we're all waiting on is will Germany provide tanks? And we've heard there's been some reporting that they will only provide tanks if the U.S. does. But the U.S. said, defense officials from the U.S. said earlier today and yesterday that it really isn't necessarily the smartest idea given the significant amount of maintenance and training that are required for U.S. tanks in particular.
Tanks or no tanks. So are the bigger concerns logistical? So you mentioned the training requirements and the maintenance requirements of the tanks. Is it that this could be construed as offensive weaponry? Is it that countries are going to have to draw down their own fleets? What's really the big sticking point in terms of giving Ukraine the tanks?
So part of it is there is a concern that the U.S. and other Western countries have that they don't want to provoke President Putin. They don't want to further, spark something, or they don't want to be brought into the conflict more directly. And so we haven't really heard this as a reason behind the current tanks conversation. We do know, though, that long-range missiles will not be included in this upcoming aid package.
Right.
Now, this is a capability that Ukrainian officials and President Zelensky have been asking for months. And the U.S. throughout the entire time has said no. And their belief is they don't want to provide Ukraine with weapons that they can and will use to attack Russian targets, because they feel that that is an escalation that they are not willing to cross. We haven't really heard that conversation with tanks. We really have heard it from the U.S. perspective, at least, in terms of a logical sense. They feel like tanks aren't the right type of weaponry to provide at this point. They have said, tanks are not necessarily completely off the table.
Right.
Just right now, it's their view that they have other weapons and other systems that would better fit Ukraine's needs, even though Ukraine keeps asking for this from not only the U.S. but from countries around the world.
So Russia has lost a lot of its friends on the international stage as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. But there's one ally that they've gained that seem to have gotten closer as this war has gone on. Talk a little bit about Russia and Iran.
That's a great comment, or a great point. So we've seen over the course of the war, President Putin has really become sort of a piranha. But the one ally that he's really gained, as you said, is Iran. And so back in the summer, when the war was at a different place than it is now, Russia decided, with their depleting stockpiles, they would seek Iranian drones.
Right.
And they changed their entire military strategy, and they decided to rely on these drones, which were kamikaze drones, to essentially pulverize Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And it really became, a defining part of the war for the fall months. We've seen some of these Iranian drone strikes both decrease in number, but we've also seen the U.S. and Western allies provide, additional air defenses to combat some of these. And so, while that has sort of gone on a little bit of a back burner right now, the White House and the National Security Council are really, starting to raise concerns about their continuing and growing relationship, both now and moving forward. We saw some reporting this weekend from Iranian state media that, citing an Iranian lawmaker, that they actually expect to have Russian fighter jets delivered to them sometime this spring. Now, the U.S. hasn't commented on, these claims in this reporting, but it does demonstrate the level of the partnership that they have developed and the U.S. concern for it.
And it's not the only reason negotiations over re-entering the Iran nuclear deal have stalled, but this clearly hasn't helped.
Absolutely. And so we heard President Biden say weeks ago that the JCPOA is essentially dead. And that really is what it comes down to, is at this point there is no conversation about re-entering it. And not only that, but it is now the U.S., it seems like, is more concerned about Iran's ability to impact not only the region, but now the world as they are in Ukraine.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.